Okay, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I can't hear anything, so I'm just going to begin.
We can hear you,
Yeah,
Becky.
I
We can hear
work.
you fine.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. So yeah, I work as a freelance textile conservator. Oh, sorry, this has gone the wrong. There. Okay, near Maastricht in the Netherlands. And today I would like to share a small mounting project in my talk. So to start off, the objects, in contrast to the previous few talks, which have covered whole exhibitions, I'm just going to focus on these small pair of gloves. I have a particular interest in traditional textile mending and darning techniques, so when these heavily mended gloves arrived in my studio from a private client, they were right up my street. They date from the 1940s and originally belonged to a woman called Joanna Peterson who lived in Denmark. The scarcity of materials, both during and post-World War II, means that she would have understood the importance of mending, as can be seen from these gloves. They have layer upon layer of repairs that have been added over their working lifetime in a whole variety of stitches. Her family members remember her unraveling old jumpers to use the wool for mending and reknitting, so it's probable that many of the darns in these gloves use materials from other garments too. So to me, they're one of these humble objects that really represent a rich snippet of social history. On to the mounting requirements. The overall structural condition of these gloves was pretty good. There were some ink stains, but these were viewed as part of the object's life story, so removing them was not a requirement. The main project brief was to make them suitable for framed display, with the one important caveat that she wanted to be able to have the option to turn each glove over so that both sides could be viewed. She is a member of several local history groups and wanted to be able to share the gloves as a study resource. It was therefore really important that the mounting method be easy and safe for anyone to take the gloves on and off a board, bearing in mind that these gloves are owned by a private client rather than a heritage institution, and therefore the people handling them in the future won't necessarily be trained in safe object handling. So I really wanted the solution to be as easy and bomb-proof as possible. I also try and always keep in mind that, unlike in an institution, private clients may not necessarily have easy access to a trained conservator or a trained mount maker in the future. So any treatments or mounting that I do should ideally be very easy to undo without damaging the object in the process. If, for example, the client decides that they would like a different mount background or a different mount situation. Exploring options. Mounting the gloves on a padded board seemed like the obvious solution to allow for framing. However, I didn't want to stitch the gloves directly to the board, as is the normal method for textile or padded board mounting. For one thing, this would stop them from being able to be easily turned over. And for another, I didn't want to introduce new stitches into an object where the layers of different stitches were so integral to its story. This meant that attachment options such as stitching Velcro or snap fasteners to the gloves were also precluded. How then to proceed? I played around with a few ideas. On the left, you can see my sketch for an internal hand shape that the gloves could be slid onto. If these hands were then attached to the padded board at their lower edge, the gloves wouldn't have to be directly attached to the board. I also wondered about tying the gloves to the surface of the board or creating a series of pins or pegs that the gloves could sit between. The pin idea I discounted because of the likelihood that it would cause the gloves to slump if displayed unsupported like that long term. Tying was always going to be somewhat visible and seemed a bit fiddly for whoever might be removing and replacing them on the board, and this just seemed an extra risk of damage. The internal mount idea was still an option, but to me it seemed a little overly complicated for the task, and I was quite concerned that the gloves might start to get damaged if they're being repeatedly taken on and off internal mounts. The fingers of the gloves were actually quite stiff and distorted and would likely prevent a hand form from sliding in smoothly. The many stitches in the gloves also meant that there were quite a lot of loose threads and loops inside the glove, and the risk of these getting caught and the knitting becoming damaged as the mount is inserted seemed too high. So this led me to think about magnets, which led me to this solution. I decided to use small, rare earth grade 42 neodymium magnets as a mounting system. These were covered with marble seal barrier film and a layer of silk and stitched onto a padded board. And similarly covered magnets were gently dropped into each glove finger so that the gloves hang against the board from their fingers. The gloves can then be easily removed from the board in order to study their reverse sides, and the magnets can be slid out of the gloves if a new display or storage method is ever desired. The gloves can be attached to the board to show their front or reverse faces. For ease of later magnet retrieval and to prevent any magnets from getting accidentally lost during handling, I attached each one to a thread. These threads were then knotted together. You can see this on the right-hand side of the screen, with the knot sitting just inside the palm of the glove. To remove the magnets, you just pull the knot. And here is the final result. I should just say the padded board in this project was not quite standard. At the request of the client, it was covered in a monogrammed damask napkin belonging to the original owner of the gloves. The damask was slightly textured, which was actually ideal in providing a little extra friction to support the gloves further. I did debate adding a patch of loop-side Velcro to sit under the palm of each gloves to provide even more friction, but in the end, this actually didn't seem necessary. I went for relatively thin magnets as I didn't want the compression forces of the magnets to be too strong for the texture of the knitting, even though this is quite felted and thick. The thickness of the textile, which varied a bit depending on whether it had been, repaired 2, 3, 4 times, was around 3 to 4 millimeters, which I think is about 1/8 of an inch. And this thickness also helped in reducing the attraction force between the magnets, as these forces lessen as the gap between the magnets gets bigger. For larger or heavier objects, hanging from points like this would start to present problems, creating points of strain. And for these, I would probably have considered attaching magnets to a larger internal support prior to mounting, rather than using them loose inside the glove like I did here, in order just to spread the weight a bit more evenly. And here is a little video of the magnets in action. I hope that works. Just see taking on and putting it off again. Anyway, I just thought I would share this as a simple option for mounting these kinds of small, slightly three-dimensional objects where stitch attachment might not be desirable. I thought it might potentially be useful as an easy mounting option for small items, especially in study and reference collections. Being attached to a padded board has the added benefit of minimizing the amount of handling directly on the object, and the magnetic aspect means that all sides are still accessible, and potential future display or storage options are not complicated by the presence of a hard to remove or invasive mount. And that's the end. I know it's quite short, but thank you so much for listening. I've included a few links here to a couple of articles I found especially helpful when researching magnet mounting options. I just thought they might be useful to anyone wanting to explore magnets but not sure where to start. Thank you.
I actually had a question. Was this mounted upright, or was this on an angle or flat? What was the intended, I guess, display angle of this piece?
Upright. So it was for a private client with the intention that it would hang in her home. And I find with private clients, there's certain aspects that I really have to take into consideration that maybe wouldn't occur in museum settings. They want stuff mounted, to look at. You don't know how long it's going to be up there. It might hang on her wall 6 months, it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years. And you also don't know who it's going to pass to. I mean, she was an elderly lady. It'll probably go to her daughter after this, how it's then going to be displayed. So she wanted it upright, but she also wanted to take it to the local history group. So then, it will be going probably in a bag in her car. So I wanted it to be quite robust, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. We have a virtual question. How are the strings attached to the magnets?
Oh, I stitched them to the back of the silk that was covering the magnets. So for each magnet, it was a bit fiddly because they were quite small, but I covered them in a Marvel Seal barrier there. And then I stitched silk around them as well, and that gave me an attachment point to the thread, for the thread, sorry.
Thank you.
I was actually curious about if you were wondering if you were worried about any compression of the material, of the kind of fibers with the magnets being like kind of pinched in between it.
Yeah, this is something I looked into quite a bit because, again, not knowing how long this is going to be on display for. I mean, wool has quite a good elastic recovery, and these were wool, but they were also so incredibly felted, and there were so many layers of stitching that they were quite solid. They kind of stood up by themselves. And I took into account the strength of the magnet when choosing it, for these compression forces. So I think the conservation standards are usually N35, N42, and N52. And I was really trying to choose a magnet that wasn't stronger than it needed to be. I didn't want more compression forces than absolutely necessary. The N35 I found a bit too weak because the textile was so thick. And, the potential movement of it going in a car and that kind of thing, I thought that's not quite strong enough. The N52 was too strong. Does that answer your question?
Hi, I thought that was really interesting and wonderful to present a very modest, humble object with very modest and humble surroundings. So thank you for that. My question is, I didn't quite understand how the magnet on the underside is attached to the substrate. I mean, how does it stay?
To the padded board?
Yeah.
So they are also covered in silk, and then I just stitch round.
Ah, okay, so on the surface of the padded board.
On the surface of the padded board, although with some other projects, I have recessed, like projects I've done since then, I have actually recessed them into the padded board, done the barrier layers, and then covered it in the fabric. For these, because the gloves were sort of a bit distorted, actually they had a better connection with the magnets because the magnets were sitting above the surface of the board.
Thank you.
But I think for something flatter, I would probably recess them into the board just for a neater finish.
Thank you very much, Becky.